Yo, it's me. I'm back making another video after not making a video for 4 days. Just thought I'd bring you a new video today. Today, this is just going to be the return of my Wrestling Forgotten Gems. I know I haven't made those videos in a while, but I'm bringing that back today. And this is going to be Wrestling Forgotten Gems, talking about a wrestler that you're all familiar with, Scott Hall, aka the Diamond Stud, aka Razor Ramon, or whatever aliases he went through in his wrestling career. This is just going to be a brief video just talking about him and why he's forgotten in wrestling history. But before I get to that, I watched ROH last week, and I gotta say, I mean, it was my first time watching ROH last week, and I gotta say, I was pretty impressed with some of the things I saw in ROH. I mean, there was a decent tag team match with Jerry Lynn, and I forgot who the other guy was, against two guys. It was Tyler Black and Jerry Lynn against these two other guys that I'm really not familiar with. That was a pretty good decent matchup. Although they did botch a few moves and some of the timing in that matchup was off, it was still a very good matchup. You had a decent women's matchup between two ladies who I'm not familiar with, but when I keep watching ROH more, I'll know their names really well. That was a pretty good, decent match, and I just wish that the WWE can put on women's matches like that, and TNA would put women's matches on like that every once in a while, all the time. But apparently they can't, so thus you get what you get. And then of course the main event, I believe, yeah, the main event, I believe, which was a pretty good, decent steel, which was a very good steel cage matchup. And WWE and TNA need to take notes on how you do a steel cage matchup. I know WWE knows how to do it, but they kind of lost their sense of how to do steel cage matches, and TNA kind of lost their sense of how to do steel cage matches. As every time you see a TNA matchup, you always see run-ins and stuff like that, and that's not how a steel cage match is supposed to be. But overall, I was pretty impressed with ROH last week. Just my first time watching it. Well, I have seen clips and stuff of it, but it was my actual first time watching it, and I need to get more into it, and then probably I'll start buying DVDs and start turning my whole focus onto them more instead of the WWE and TNA, even though I haven't really been watching both companies as of late. As I said in my two videos before, that those companies have been throwing crap out lately, and I'm not going to be watching crap if they keep throwing the same crap in front of you. You got a John Cena and Randy Orton matchup again at the next pay-per-view, which is an Iron Man matchup. You had John Cena talking about comparing the Randy Orton John Cena feud to the Rock and Austin feud, which not even close to what Rock and Austin had, because that feud was intense. It led to several good matches between the two, and those two just had really good chemistry in the ring, and they just took the crowds. They just took the crowd for a roller coaster in all their matches. With the John Cena Randy Orton matchup, those two haven't been taking you for a ride or a roller coaster at all, as their matches have just been lackluster, except for their 2006 matchup. But anything after that, just been horrible. And I wish this feud would end. Hopefully, it ends at bragging rights and we can get over that. But yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say about ROH. Sorry it took me like 3 minutes to talk about that, but let's get off that subject. Wrestling Forgotten Gems, number 17, Scott Hall, probably one of the best wrestling workers, probably one of the best underrated wrestling workers who never really won a world title, should have won a world title, but the demons and everything else kind of caught up to him, and that prevented him from being a world heavyweight champion. I mean, he started his career in the independent scenes, and then he came to WCW, where he was wrestling as a Diamond Stud. I believe he was like a sort of a mid-card jobber where he's jobbing to all the big stars. And then he would team with Benny Vegas and team with Diamond Dallas Page, who sort of trained him, I guess, or who's sort of their manager. And then after that, he sort of broke away and he came to WWF in one of the most sort of controversial roles, as he played Razor Ramon, who was supposed to be like who was supposed to be like Al Pacino's character from Scarface. But the problem with Razor Ramon was he was white, but Scott Hall was able to make you believe that he was actually Cuban with that accent, even though it was kind of lame. But he was still able to convince you that this character was what this character was, and the character took off from there as he had his good heel run. He had matches against Bret Hart, probably one of the most underrated matches he's ever had in his career against Bret Hart because many people don't talk about it. Those were just very good matches. He then was in that feud with Ric Flair and him against Randy Savage in a newly a fresh face turn, Kurt Hennig or Mr. Perfect. That was a very good feud. Feuded with Macho Man Randy Savage. He then went on to feud with Bob Backlund in that whole veteran and young guy storyline, which Razor Ramon beat him at WrestleMania 9, which was an awful matchup. And I believe Razor Ramon could have did something better for Razor Ramon than that. And but it was what it was, and but they could have booked that match. They could have had that match last a little bit longer, but I guess they were afraid that match would be awful. And then, of course, after that, he had that thing with the 1-2-3 Kid, where the 1-2-3 Kid beat him, and just he was like on a losing streak after that. And then, of course, the million dollar man in IRS started making fun of him, and then he turned face after that. And then he had a very good face run as he would have a underrated feud and an underrated matchup with Big Daddy Cool Diesel, who you know as Kevin Nash. Those two had a matchup at SummerSlam 1994, and it's probably one of the most underrated matches on that pay-per-view because it gets overshadowed mainly because of the Bret Hart Owen Hart matchup, which was a good matchup in itself. Also, it gets overshadowed because of the whole Tatanka Lex Luger thing. Many people were talking about that at the time, and really they weren't really talking about this matchup and the build to this matchup. But it was still a good matchup. I wish people would talk about this matchup more, but they don't. So you just get what you get. He had his feud with Shawn Michaels, which led to probably one of the best ladder matches of all time, and it gets topped sometimes, but there hasn't been any match that sort of even comes close to that matchup between those two because those two just had a very good matchup at WrestleMania 10. And then, of course, after that, he sort of floundered around in mid card, losing the Intercontinental title, feuding with Dean Douglas. Had his match with Shawn Michaels again at SummerSlam 1995, and one of the most underrated SummerSlam matches of all time. And then after that, he sort of went floundering even more, and then he won the Intercontinental title from Dean Douglas, went on to face Goldust, and probably one of the most bizarre feuds, but it did help get the Goldust character over, and it helped set up the 1-2-3 Kid, Razor Ramon storyline and the match between those two. And it was just overall, he had a pretty good year in 1996. Then went on to WCW, went on to become the Outsiders, and was the part of the NWO, was one of the main focal points of the NWO, and then the whole thing sort of took off, and then it was towards the end of, it was sort of towards the part of 98 where his career sort of suffered a little bit because of his off-screen alcohol problems, and people were trying to get him help, but he didn't want to get help. Sometimes he would come to the ring wrestling a little drunk, and his career was just sort of taking a spine, taking a turn for the worse. And then after that, he just never saw him until 1999, but his career was never the same after that. But still, Scott Hall, very good worker, never gets the most recognition that he should get when in the wrestling business, because mainly because people tend to talk about how his career ended, but they don't talk about the good, wonderful career that he had in the WWF and then in the WCW before he became an alcoholic. But still, very good worker. I wish that some people wouldn't forget about him, as he was one of the best workers, even one of the best workers in the NWO, probably the only worker that can go in the NWO, because really, who else did you have in the NWO besides Kurt Hennig and Scott Hall, who were the only two good workers of the NWO? But still, he gets forgotten in wrestling history, and it's a shame because, like I said, this guy was a good worker, but it's a shame what happened to his career, which many people now forget about him because of how his career ended. But still, people like me will never forget about the guy who was Razor Ramon and sort of took that character off and took his own spin to it, sort of was the founder of the NWO and sort of had a good career in wrestling. And we won't forget about that. But yeah, that's just my Wrestling Forgotten Gems video. Hope you like my video. Rate, comment, and tell me what you think about the video. Until then, Fitness65 out. Peace.